our speaker, Julie Saunders-Decker, talk about queer stuff. Yay.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to not be talking to myself. Let's see. Can we see me? I can't tell if I can see me.
So we're going to check the camera.
Can you see me in the window here? I am recording this, so it's going to be on YouTube later. So fair warning. I'll get into that a little.
Yeah, if you, right now we can see you, but if you keep moving to the right, we can't, so.
Okay, so where do I need to stand?
Right there is good.
Here?
Yep.
Oh, good, so I can't see. We'll make it work. Oh.
Yeah.
Hey, magic. Thank you.
Yep, you're good.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, so I have flown here all the way from Florida to see you guys and talk to you about can't talk. I'm on like 2 hours of sleep. Inclusive queer spaces. I'm going to talk about examining the intersection of asexuality, aromanticism, demi-gray identities, all that wonderful stuff, and queerness and or the LGBT community at large. Some of you may not know me, but some of you may. My name is Julie Saunders-Decker. Most of my friends call me Ivy. I'm known online as Swank Ivy, and I blog under that name. I do YouTube videos, all that fun stuff, and I am an asexuality educator, author, blogger. I'm on Tumblr, all that fun stuff. I identify as asexual and aromantic. For me, that means I am not sexually attracted to people, I'm not romantically attracted to people, and I don't want any kind of a partner, personally. And I am the author of this lovely book, The Invisible Orientation. I brought a copy if anybody wants to play with it over there. I didn't have a table, I couldn't levitate it right here. So I brought a copy if you want to play with it, but I don't have any copies to share with people here. It is out in hardcover, in audio, and in ebook, and it actually sold better than the publisher expected, so it's going to come out in paperback in fall, and I'm really excited because it's going to be pushed to bookstores, and that's what I really wanted, because that's going to be like sort of mainstream for us, and it's going to be more affordable. So, what I want you guys to know just before I get into this, if you have any questions, any ideas, feedback, anything, this is pretty informal. You can I'm so sorry. Ah, you're cool. Like I just said, informal. If anybody has questions or feedback or anything, you can interrupt me, but just so you know, there's my camera over there. I'm recording this for my channel, so I can share this with all my subscribers online. And so if you say anything to me, it will end up on the video. Now, if you're okay with that, go for it. If you're not okay with that, just tell me to edit that part out. I promise I'll do it. So if you're shy about being on the internet. I got a fair number of subscribers these days, so a lot of people might hear your voice. I don't think you can see anybody else but me, though, so it'll just be you talking. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? It's not a huge room. Okay, so first I'm gonna talk about two things today, two separate but related items. Mostly it's gonna be focusing on our shared experience with LGBT+. And then I'm gonna go a little bit at the end into what we can teach and learn from each other. So a lot of you who have done some interaction with, been in larger queer groups have probably heard this lovely objection, like, what's queer about you, what are you doing here? Without going into too much detail here, usually what we hear is that there are certain orientations in the asexual and aromantic, demi and gray communities that will be interpreted as straight, heterosexual. If there's this perception that we can choose to belong to straight populations or that we don't experience the same kinds of oppressions, then some people are going to say, like, well, what do you really share with us? What do you have in common with the larger LGBT community that you think that we should share space or that you think that we should share resources? Of course, some of these objections sound a lot like some of the stuff they say about one of their own letters. So, a lot of bi erasure, a lot of things that we have in common with them. And I actually hear this about some types of trans people too, that if they are frequently misinterpreted as being a cis person, and they have a cross-sex partner, people will say, well, you know, don't you just spend most of your life getting interpreted as a straight person? And like the idea that that person doesn't experience transphobia anymore or has no relevant part in the LGBT plus community is really baffling to me. Like, so what I first want to say though is that personally, most of the queer and LGBT and all these quote bag organizations and whatnot have been really inclusive in my experience. Like every time I go into one or you know, participate vocally in one, it seems like the majority voice really is pretty inclusive. That's been my experience. That's the Lambda Award there. And if you didn't know, I'm actually a finalist for this. I'm really excited. I got picked in the LGBT nonfiction category as one of 8 finalists. And you know, to be honest, I almost didn't enter because they didn't have like a more inclusive label for what I could enter under. So I put it under this, and they picked me as one of them. So you know, they're a huge organization. Lambda Literary, they're just the biggest LGBT book-related organization, and like they carry so much weight, and they recognized me, and by extension, I guess us. So you know, that's one of the experiences I've had. This year's a little straight happened when I was on a panel at Creating Change a few years ago. National Conference on LGBT Equality, Creating Change in Atlanta. I was one of 4 asexual panelists. I was the aromantic asexual woman. We had a gay, gray sexual man, and 2 agender people who I believe were identifying as panromantic, but I'm not positive about that. Don't quote me on that. And it seemed like our panel was pretty well attended. People were really cool to us. People were curious. People asked respectful questions. And you know, I felt welcome there. And then I've been to several others. I went to IDQ at Princeton, and I did a talk pretty much like this one. I was part of, we did Asexual Conference in Toronto last year as part of World Pride. I went to the University of Virginia at Pride Week, you know, similar stuff. This was all like under a larger umbrella of like queer activism, recognizing that asexuality should be part of it. So just really, in my experience, it's been like they think that we have a seat at the table. And then also these, there are some mainstream like sex positive and sort of gay and or alternative sexualities will have their own publications, and sometimes they reach out to me, ask me for an interview, podcast, something. But the question still remains. Sometimes they say, you know, what exactly do we have in common? What do you have pride about? Because they have this perception that we haven't ever been told we shouldn't be proud of it, or that there's, you know, there's nothing that we really have too much in common except that we're also saying we're not straight. So I just want to say, like, this, putting a little trigger warning here, because I am going to share one example of this comment. It's not too harsh. This is something I saw on Tumblr. Someone please tell me how asexuals are discriminated against, why they're included in LGBTQ. It's the same discrimination as someone saying they don't want kids. Please tell me what someone being asexual has to do with infringing on their rights or being bullied. So this person and a large number of other people I've seen seem to think that institutional oppression is required before a queer identity is valid. Now, first of all, I want to point out the obvious is that there's a huge amount of overlap in our communities. There's so many asexual people who identify as a romantic orientation other than hetero-romantic, and there are tons and tons of people who are gender identity other than cis. And this lovely little graph by Siggy is an analysis of some of the breakdowns of the responses we got. I think it was a 2011 asexual community census. Over 4,000 asexual people in various communities responded to this. So I mean, it's pretty good data, and it's huge. Just the people who are not identifying as something that could be interpreted as cis, something that could be interpreted as straight. But what ends up happening is they say only some of you guys are okay, and people like me, I'm aromantic and sorted into the straight box fairly often because that's some kind of default in their minds. They believe that we don't really have a reason for being here unless we have the same kind of hate experiences as they do. And my question is, what kind of meaning does queerness have in the absence of hatred? If homophobia and transphobia disappeared tomorrow, would a queer identity still have some kind of meaning? And I think it would. I don't believe that a queer identity should depend on who hates you and how they express their hatred. So, first of all, the way that we experience hatred and othering, it looks different. You can't use the same metrics to measure LGBT kind of hate versus asexual hate, aromantic kind of hate, any gray identity hate, because what you're going to do is you're going to say, well, I don't see you getting killed coming out of gay bars. Well, we don't have a bar, you know, just you're not going to see the same examples. Furthermore, as invisibility versus hostility, those are two different kinds of terrible experiences, and I've certainly experienced a fair amount of hostility, but I think invisibility is a little bit more common for people in aromantic spectrum and asexual spectrum circles. What's interesting also about the invisibility is that they also don't see the hostility that results from identifying as asexual or aromantic or somewhere on the demi or gray spectrum. They will look at this and they say, like, not only do I not see you, but I don't see how it's hurting you, because I'm just not putting myself in a position where that would be visible to me. So also so asexuality, aromanticism, and or demi-gray identity, it's ultimately assumed to be the least important thing about us, the least relevant part of our identity. So what I hear a lot of times is, this gets a little complicated, but say there's an asexual woman. I'm going to use me for example. I'm asexual, aromantic, and I'm getting unwanted attention from a man. And if he decides that he's going to keep pushing for my attention, and eventually he does something really terrible or violent or something to me, I can say, well, you know, this guy did this because he was challenging me over my identity. And other people will say, no, that's misogyny. That's just because you're a woman. That isn't really because you're ace or aromantic. And so you also hear people being misinterpreted as gay, you know, because in, say, hypermasculine cultures, men are assumed to be gay if they are not actively chasing women, and if they are not actively chasing women, sometimes they can be the target of homophobia, and some people will say that's not an asexual kind of hate, it's homophobia, etc., etc. So they will always assume that something else is more important in interpreting what happens to us. So what I think is that the common cause for all of our problems in these related communities is heteronormativity. That is the root of it. And it ends up leading to us being natural allies, our communities and our individuals. So what struggles do we share? So I'm going to go over a few of these. Some of these may surprise you and some may be really obvious. So just letting you know. Marriage laws. So we all know this nation is moving in a positive direction for marriage equality. Like, how does this affect, say, people who are somewhere on the aromantic spectrum or people who are asexual? Well, first of all, a lot of people don't know that there are consummation laws. This knocks people's socks off sometimes. There are still several states where, to my knowledge, this is pretty current. There are consummation laws on the books. This doesn't mean you have to consummate your marriage for it to be legal, but it does mean that someone can invoke consummation laws to annul a marriage. And if they assumed that there was going to be sex involved and they didn't get it, they can invoke this as, oh, my marriage is not legal. Weirdly enough, a lot of people will say, oh, that's because it's expected that you're going to start a family. Interestingly enough, no states permit annulment on basis of infertility. Isn't that odd? They always say it's about the babies. It's never about the babies. Never. So this also extends to non-romantic relationships, which many of us in the aromantic communities and spectrums might have. Atypical relations, poly relationships, same gender and perceived as same gender relationships, people who are agender, people who are non-binary. So some of these people will be having less typical relationships that they are not allowed to have recognized under the law, and that is, I would venture to say that it's unusually common. Is that a decent phrase? Unusually common. In asexual and aromantic and demi-gray circles, you're going to see a lot more less typical relationships that can't be recognized under law. And there is also this immigration element to it. If you have two people who want to get married, and there is a question as to whether this is one of them who's getting married to the other one to stay in the country, sometimes you'll get interviewed by these immigration authorities, and they will assume that if your marriage is really you're having sex, and they'll separate you, and they'll interview you separately, and they'll ask you questions about your sex life. And if it seems like you're not having sex, they'll hold that against you as a likelihood of this is a sham. And this isn't something that happens in everybody's marriage interviews. A lot of them are not very hostile at all. Sometimes they're pretty respectful. Sometimes you don't even get an interview. You just have to make statements and get witnesses to sign them. But in places where one or more of the people involved is from a country that the U.S. immigration people are considering to be less desirable, and they're more intent on keeping them out of the country, they will tend to be more harsh with them and try to look for some kind of reason why they can judge your marriage to not be real, on the basis of whether you're having sex. So on to the next one, which is job and housing discrimination. Obviously, we know that this happens for LGBT+. Now, there was a study done, and I'm going to talk about some of the problems with the study, just touch on a couple of the problems with this in a minute, but there was a study done. This surprises a lot of people. It's called Intergroup Bias Toward Group X, which was asexual people specifically. Evidence of prejudice, dehumanization, avoidance, and discrimination against asexuals. In the study, asexual was defined pretty much the way that we do in the community, and then they asked people in a survey, would you rent a house to this person? Would you give a job to this person? What do you think of this person? What are the qualities that you would describe to this person? Strangely enough, they found that asexual people they answered similarly for asexual people and some of the LGBT. So discrimination intentions were there, supposedly. Some people have raised questions while examining the study, like, were these really discrimination intentions? And like, was it just that they were getting used to a new term? Maybe they were hostile toward it because of this. Would we really see this playing out in the real world? And those are good questions to ask. But I've actually read some blogs where, like, I saw this on Asexual Cupcake, where someone talked about, was I fired because of my asexuality? The blog post was kind of it was kind of scary to read, but it was mostly about, oh, my coworker was always saying really sexual things and it bothered me, so I would remove myself from the conversation, and then my coworker thought that that was really funny, so started to deliberately harass me with these sexual comments, and I acquire this perception that I'm antisocial or that I'm not a team player because I keep avoiding them or going into another room whenever they're all having their talks about what they did with their boyfriend. And they were eventually taken into the manager's office and told that they were reported for having a bad attitude, and they're the one causing this, and they were fired. And there was also some discussion on this blog about mental health issues that may have been intersecting, which is very important to discuss also. But the truth is, we're seeing it in the theory, and we're seeing it in the practice. And personally, I think that I've certainly seen attitudes of like, okay, you're weird, and you're not like us, and you're not part of our culture, and you're not getting along with us. You're strange. So I could certainly see someone saying, okay, I don't know if I want a person like this to work for me because I don't think they'll fit in with my crew. And sometimes it gets a little more insidious than that, I think, but that's about as much as I have for this one. I'm going to go on to the next one, which is adoption denial, which sounds kind of ridiculous. Like, has anybody really denied an asexual couple adoption? We know that this happens for people who are on the LGBT spectrum. But I saw this YouTube video fellow named Olivier Cormier-Otano, I think I'm saying that right, in Spotlight on Asexuality. He shared an anecdote where an asexual couple went to adopt, and they were asked, okay, well, what's your reasons for adopting? Why aren't you going to conceive yourselves? You know, are you sterile, or what's going on? And they said, well, actually, we don't want to conceive our own child because we're asexual. We prefer not to have sex. And the person's immediate response was, oh, well, if you are asexual, you're not fit to be married. And it was denied. I don't know how much of that had to do with that interaction, but the suggestion is that this reflects the common attitude about what marriage is for. That marriage is only for straight people who are going to raise children, and it's the execution of a prejudice that your lifestyle is not right for kids. You raise kids in this environment. It's not right. It's deviant. So. On to anti-discrimination law. Interestingly enough, some sexual orientation-related legislation has included the word asexual, which was a surprise to me. There's nothing been in the law so far about romantic orientations. I would really like to see an expansion of this. But New York has SONDA. That is, they haven't specifically mentioned asexual as one of the sexual orientations that they consider a protected category. Vermont also protected category. I don't know if that's true anymore, but I did see it in the papers, and now I'm having trouble finding that site again. And then Texas, weirdly enough, was apparently proposed a non-discrimination policy that mentioned asexuality. I don't know what's come of this since. Then Elizabeth Emmons wrote this really excellent paper called Compulsory Sexuality, and she got it published in Stanford Law Review. This is kind of massive paper that was all about how law kind of manifests in the sex compulsory culture that affects asexual people specifically, and how that's going to come out in the world. It's no secret that the asexual population kind of skews young because of the known asexual population skews young because of the way that awareness is being spread mostly through the internet. And the argument is that as we start coming out of colleges and into workplaces as out people, you're going to see more discrimination as well. This was also kind of the slant of the ENDA paper that we wrote, Asexual Awareness Week, and and AVEN got together and wrote something on joint stationery there. This was a few years ago. Actually, this happened at Creating Change. I got to proofread it, but it was a memo basically that was written in association with a transgender group, where we were saying, hey, we should be mentioned in the federal non-discrimination law. Hasn't happened yet, but working on it. So on to religious attitudes. This is great. So I probably don't have to be specific about how religious attitudes manifest as prejudice in LGBT plus circles. For asexual and aromantic, Demi and Gray, you will see this abstinence equals purity idea. Some people will say, what's wrong with that? Purity, that's a good thing. Not all of us really like those purity narratives, and actually I think they're pretty damaging. But this idea that you're innocent and you're saving it for someone. And then on to, of course, pressure to marry and reproduce. There's this be fruitful and multiply idea that is pretty common in several religions. And also, this is a weird one, celibacy is considered meaningless if it isn't, it's not sacrifice. And this came from, I remember having this discussion with someone at Creating Change. I was talking to an asexual person who, oddly enough, once wanted to be a nun. And they were talking to another, someone who was a nun, I think was a nun or was somehow involved in this, and described asexuality. And this nun said, well, you don't have the constitution for this. I don't think that you would make a good nun because that's not a sacrifice for you. So it's kind of a strange, group of religious attitudes that can affect asexuality. And this is such a broad topic that I would probably be talking about it forever. And I tried to keep it kind of short in my book too, but I ended up going on for a few pages, and I'm just not going to do it now. So on to media representation. So the LGBTQ community is very used to being punchline, being the man in a dress joke, trans people as scary, as punishment for someone. You know, gay men who are flamboyant and everyone thinks it's hilarious. Butch lesbians, all that fun things. We have interesting media representations too. This fella here is Martin from the Canadian comedy, I think it was, called Godivas. It's canceled, it's no longer on. He was a heteroromantic, asexual man, and he just decided he had a disorder and he got himself fixed with hormones. So, and it was a big gag and it was hilarious. Not really. But they did actually use the word asexual in the show, which is interesting. And I think that after he got his hormone treatment, he had an asexual girlfriend who was appalled by how he changed. So that's kind of interesting, but not a good message, I think. You know, oh, we fixed him and it's funny. Anyway, Poppy from Huge, she's aromantic and asexual. It was kind of a one-line the American drama Huge is now canceled. She was confessing kind of to her co-counselor. She was explaining how she didn't really understand romantic movies or romantic feelings and stuff, and she also said the word asexual, which is, you know, it was really nice because the guy just kind of said, what? And then he's like, oh, okay. And it was nice to see somebody actually respond to asexuality and, you know, a description of aromantic. She didn't use the word. But to say like, oh, really? Oh, okay. And there was no follow-up where they tried to fix her. But it was also kind of a throwaway. Like it was very short and sweet and not focused upon. So as far as representation goes, not so great. But it was nice to see some where it was incidental for once. Now this fella here is Gerald. Gerald is, honestly, I think he's one of the best asexual characters that I've ever seen on television, even though there are some problematic aspects of how they tie it up with some of his OCD and stuff. They kind of imply that there was some problems that his mom caused by being really open about sex when he was very young. But like they mostly don't suggest that, and they usually do a nice job of showing that someone can be an anxious person and can be an asexual person and be, he's biromantic, by the way, you know, struggling with relationships. And throughout the, you know, he discovers asexuality and he kind of comes to terms with it. He gets really drunk and then he's actually really happy about it, but he has to figure out how to fit it into his life. And it's on a soap opera in New Zealand called Shortland Street. And you know, I actually really liked watching it, even though there were some aspects of it that were kind of peculiar. In the USA, we got House. Did anybody see this?
Yeah.
This episode, this terrible episode. I will describe for you briefly. This Dr. Wilson guy had an asexual patient come in. She had a bladder infection or something, but he tells his good buddy, Dr. House, they're like, I have a patient who's asexual. And he goes, oh, is she a giant bowl of algae? And, you know, just he's a jerk. And they basically make a bet that he can find a medical reason why she doesn't want to have sex. And it actually turns out that her husband, who also identifies as asexual, had a pituitary tumor. And, you know, they decided, oh, we're gonna operate on him and he'll be normal. And not only that, but the woman who was married to him confessed that she had been lying because she wanted to spare his feelings and not make him feel that he was inadequate for being unable to satisfy her. So they debunked two asexual people. And, you know, Dr. House smoked his cigar and he won his $100 and he concluded, see, I told you, if you don't want sex, then you're dead, dying, or lying. And that was like the punchline of the episode. It's like, I debunked this, I solved it, and it's not real. Which is, asexuality is an acceptable punchline, basically. For the most part, you can't get away with really blatant discussions of that being like, for at least lesbian and gay people anymore. You can't say like, you see, there's no such thing as really a woman being a lesbian or a man being gay. That there's no such thing as these, and we've solved them as a disorder, because GLAAD would be up your ass if you did that. But I think that they still show transgender people pretty often as a disorder on TV. But we got a little bit of coverage of it. Salon did a piece on how House got asexuality wrong, but it's mostly because we made a lot of noise, and we don't really have like media be a watchdog organizations. We just do the best we can whining on the internet. I blogged about it. It's pretty awful. Anyway, that's about what we're getting. I don't have a slide for this, but things are actually kind of improving. I've heard, I haven't watched it yet, but the character on Sirens is apparently an asexual woman. There's some other things about that show that a lot of people don't like. So, and there's great stuff in books and webcomics and stuff like that these days. But we need a lot more, and we need it not to be punchline. On to mental health discrimination. So DSM-4, that was like the reigning psychology disorder manual for most of my life anyway. I think that, I think it was most of my life. In it, asexuality was not mentioned, but hyperactive sexual desire disorder was described as being very similar to how a lot of asexual people describe themselves. And the catch was that you weren't supposed to be able to be diagnosed with it unless you were distressed about it, like if you wanted to fix it. But there was kind of a loophole there that if it causes interpersonal distress, which meant basically if your partner was upset about it, you could be diagnosed with it. It's ridiculous. Of course, the previous one, DSM-3, actually had homosexuality as a disorder in it. So we've kind of come a long way from those days. DSM-5 is now out. This actually mentions asexuality twice, and as an exception to sexual desire disorders and arousal disorders, which is very interesting, but it kind of only makes the concession if the person identifies as asexual. Like a lot of people coming in for mental health issues, like even if they're unrelated to their sex life, they don't know these things. They don't come in there and say, oh, by the way, like I'm not here for the sex stuff. Like they'll probably have a lot of baggage about these things if they don't already know a lot about asexuality. And furthermore, like the professionals are not always educated about this. Sometimes they might have read about it and they gloss over that, or they apply personal prejudices, and that they just say, well, this is I'm not going to believe that because I really think that people need sexual relationships and or romantic relationships to be fulfilled, and I'm just going to push that because that makes most sense to me. And they may end up pushing fixes like hormones and sexual arousal drugs. I think that sounds ridiculous, but I know 3 people it happened to. Like, I'm baffled every time I hear it that somebody actually prescribed testosterone to someone because they thought that their sex drive needed to be fixed. And anyway, I'm getting a cramp in my foot. And then also they can't adequately help couples or groups that include asexual spectrum or aromantic people properly because a lot of times they're always trying to fix the less sex desiring person, or they'll be focusing on you don't want sex enough rather than you guys have mismatched sexual desires, and those narratives are common throughout our culture as well. So they're backed up by everything. They're probably going to think they need help, but therapists are not adequately prepared to help people who are in these relationships. So on to this, big trigger warning here. I am not going to be specific about anything relating to corrective rape, but I did want to mention that this does manifest in our community sometimes. I gave a story to HuffPost Gay Voices one time about I had this thing going on with a guy I had just met who wanted to kiss me goodnight at the end of the night, and I had told him I was asexual and what I felt about relationships, and he still asked to kiss me, and I thought that was really weird because I thought he had been listening, and so I said no, and he said, can I just kiss you on the cheek? And I said, yeah, that's okay. And then he licked my face like a dog. And so I got out of the car and left, and he yelled after me, I just want to help you. And that's thankfully the closest I've ever come to any kind of assault. I consider it kind of assaulty, but I described that to this paper, and among other things. And I actually got comments on this saying that I was lying about it, which is kind of amazing, because there were actually other people in there that were threatening me. So, obviously it happens. Anyway, this is compulsory sexuality in obvious manifestation. It affects all genders. We focus mostly on how it affects women, but it does affect all genders. And we can get rape threats, and we get denial that we receive rape threats. And this idea that we deserve that because we're abusing people by withholding sex, that's really, that can be a terrible message that a lot of us learn from the earliest times in our lives, which can kind of lead to this. We do have a higher rate of depression, and I don't know about if there are any statistics specifically on suicide and stuff like that, but I do know that the Trevor Project, which is specifically about LGBT-focused suicide help and depression help, did reach out to the asexual community because they said they were getting calls from asexual people who were depressed or suicidal and didn't know how to help them. And so it was Sarah Beth made this flyer to help them understand maybe how to train their people, and that's pretty amazing to me that they were inclusive and that they wanted to that they were getting this kind of response in the first place. But I do think that LGBT specific hotlines would be better prepared to help us from this perspective. They would understand a lot of the analogous situations that we've all gone through. And ultimately, lack of respect in society that we share with LGBT people. So specific phrases that we often get is we all hear it's a phase, you're trying to be different, and you're a special snowflake, you want a special label, you're too young to know. Personally, I'm already getting you're too old to want sex anymore, which is really funny because I get it at the same time as you're too young to know. And then nobody needs to know this is not important except for in your bedroom. You're afraid, what about kids, what about kids? It's never about the babies, like I said, but they can often lead to internalized depression and self-hate, so especially if you don't have resources. And specifically in the asexual and aromantic communities, Demi and Gray too, we will sometimes hear that we're broken. We'll hear this mocking of, you didn't get laid, blah, 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 emasculation, frigidity, specifically for, personally I get this more as an aromantic person, the idea that I'm alien or inhuman because I don't desire a partner. I get that more for being aromantic than I do for being asexual, which is weird. But the power of invisibility, I think that it's really underestimated of what this can do to us. And LGBTQ, etc. people, I think, are uniquely qualified to understand what that feels like. So I'm going to go on to discuss what can we learn from each other. First of all, I'm going to focus on us, on asexual, aromantic, demi-gray, and all the spectrum. What can we learn through inclusion if we are included in these spaces? So first of all, I would say we could learn about better allyship. One thing that people will argue against having us as part of their groups is that we might have more privilege and we might not know how not to talk over people who have less privilege than us. But we can learn in these communities more about how to do allyship right. Apologizing for breaches, apology it's an art form, I promise. And standing up for rights. This is sometimes being in contact with groups who are experiencing problems that you don't experience can wake you up to inequalities in society that you can do something about. Next, organization and visibility. So, yes, we're kind of a young movement as far as our organization goes. And LGBT organizations have been around longer than we have, so we can copy them. We can see what are they doing, and we can do similar things. We can learn a lot of lessons from what they're already doing right and what's worked. Also, this is a big one for me, avoiding elitism and unintentionally homophobic, biphobic, transphobic comments. Some of us who legitimately are not any of these other identities, some of us do have problems, the same kind of problems as maybe straight people or less educated, I guess, people on these subjects, with accidentally saying homophobic things. And in the asexual online discussions, sometimes I see people blowing off steam, kind of trying to, I guess, feel better about themselves by talking down about sex. Like, I'm so glad that I don't have to deal with that because I don't have to deal with animal urges and stuff like that. And that's really just very dehumanizing kind of commentary. And we can learn more about not saying those things to the people that we want to ally with by being in those groups and learning. Also inclusive dialogue and respect for choice and agency for sex positivity. I know that a lot of asexual people don't want to identify as sex positive or anything to do with, like, they really don't have what they would consider to be a positive feeling towards sex, but they should still be able to respect other people's agency, and they can learn better ways to respect others' choices. But the thing is, there should also be a space for criticism of the way sexual culture manifests, I think, so we can learn how to just have those discussions without shaming anyone. And then coming out resources. I mean, anybody who's come out has probably had a scary experience or a little bit of trepidation about what's going to happen. A lot of LGBT people have been through those, so not only will they often have advice and resources for us, but if it doesn't go well, especially, they may be able to support us and just to be there for us and to let us have some, have somebody who understands. And finally, if they're cis or they have the capacity to be interpreted as straight, we can learn how to be aware of and not exploit our privileges. So I think that being in spaces where people don't have some of the privileges that I have has helped me understand which ones I do have and how I can avoid at least not using them in a way that makes things worse for someone else. Like personally, like I used to respond to people saying, they used to always say to me, well, maybe you're too ugly to get laid, and that's really your reason. And I have to admit, like, sometimes I've responded to that with, well, no, I'm not, because I get offers. It's like, that's not what I should be saying. I should be saying, it's completely irrelevant as to whether somebody likes me. It's not, like, it doesn't make any sense for, say, a woman who's a lesbian to be told that the reason she's a lesbian is she's not getting offers from men. It's because she likes women, It's like, so I've learned through being in those spaces that the way that I defended something for myself is stepping on other people and throwing them under the bus, and that's not what my message should be. And I've learned many other things too. So what can LGBTQ plus people learn from inclusion of us? They should include us, yes. So first of all, obviously facts about asexuality. They will learn facts about asexuality, gray areas, demisexuality, aromanticism, all the spectrums. Sometimes this actually leads to personal discoveries for them, because I mean it's happened to me like 5 or 6 times where I'm talking to somebody who either identified as straight or something other than straight, but not on the asexual or aromantic spectrum, and I realized through seeing the language that I was using, like, hey, actually that describes me better than what I was using. Or they might say, like, I've always identified as, this is a specific one I knew from an acquaintance, he said, I always identified as bisexual, but I only developed sexual attraction to men, but was romantically attracted to men and women, so I called myself bisexual, but I guess the real word for me would be, I'm bisexual, but homo-romantic, and that's a word he didn't have before. He was confused, like, why do I want sex with men and women, but I only ever want romantic relationships with a man? Like, now he has words for that, and it's because we pick stuff apart because we only experience bits and pieces of some of the things that most people have fit together their whole lives. So we give names to stuff, and it's not just us who does this, and it's not always words that we invented or discussions that we had only in our communities, but these are discussions that will sometimes help lead to self-discoveries for them too. Less typical relationship models. in aromantic circles, sometimes we talk about queer platonic relationships. We talk about we talk about the importance of friendship. Like, that's a big thing for me because I don't have what I would call a primary partner, and I'm just so sick of people putting the word "just" in front of friends, because like friends are so important to me, and like I really hate when people devalue friendships, and you know, that's my relationship model right there. Like, I have really good friends, and that's it, and I don't like people seeing that as like a void in my life. And I think that discussions of these different relationships that are, you know, either something other than romantic or something that is romantic but doesn't manifest through the same channels that we're used to, will they'll understand that sometimes that's how things look for people they know, and sometimes for themselves as well. Similarly, nuanced non-sexual intimacy. Some of us do not have sex in our relationships, and some of us have found really effective ways to be intimate anyway. Sometimes those are physical, and sometimes they're emotional boundaries that we allow, like exclusively allow one or more of the special people in our relationship to cross certain thresholds of intimacy and access to our lives. And you know, we put words to this, we talk about this. It's not just the same script that everybody's used to. So sometimes those things can help them in their relationships as well as just understanding us. Also, relationship resources for people who have an asexual, aromantic, or demi or gay partner. Sometimes they just don't know what to do with us. And like, if they include us in their spaces, they can learn more about how to do that. We can, you know, of course, be helpful for those romantic, for those relationships that they have, and also for, like, if they're considering, oh, I like this person, but I found out she's asexual. Does that mean I can't have a relationship with her? Well, not necessarily. Here are some things you should consider. Those can be helpful, having a nice resource right there in your group to ask, besides the internet. And then also understanding how stigma manifests. I think it's really not just like when you see LGBT hatred, it's not necessarily just because people hate that. It's also because you lack heterosexuality, and you know, not being typically romantically inclined and not being straight has caused me a lot of friction in my life. So it's not just because I'm not one of those things. And I think that they can better understand how the stigma manifests if they hear our stories. So, and this is my last slide. So that has a question mark there. And it means, does anyone want to ask questions or say anything? And you can say stuff related to this or about other things if you want to. So, if nobody does have anything to say, though, I want to pick you guys' brains for a second. So, does anybody want to say anything right now? Yes.
I just really appreciate how you talked about the just friends thing, because like, I've got some really great friends, and I'm like, they're not just friends. Like, I appreciate them like the most. They're the highest people in my life, and how could they be just friends? Because they're just so much more than that.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't it drive you up the wall sometimes when they say, like, when somebody has a romantic relationship, that automatically outranks a friend of 10 years? Like, just, oh, it makes me so mad. And I'm like, really? Like, actually, one of my best friends, this is such a great story. One of my best friends, he told me that if he ever started dating a girl and she wasn't okay with me, he'd dump her first. And I was like, I'll keep him. And we've been friends for 15 years, so we still go out to eat every Wednesday. And like, yeah, when I get back, we're going out to dinners. Yeah, he's a great friend, and I have several really good friends, and none of them are people who really devalue friendships, and all of them actually, two of them are in romantic relationships. One of them's married, and one of them's living with a significant other, and one of them has had romantic relationships, but didn't let them interfere with me. So, I mean, at the end, thanks for saying that. Anybody else want to talk? No? Okay. Well, one thing I just wanted to ask you guys, so I am mildly revising the book for its new edition, and I didn't get a lot of criticism. It was kind of nice, but one of the things that people were kind of consistently saying when they gave it a good hard look was that my section on the queer intersections mostly focused on the why inclusion is important, but didn't really talk very much about asexual people, aromantic people, and people who are demi or gray who have also an LGBT identity. Like if they're in a queer group, like what their experiences are. I'm mostly focused on the people that popular narratives will say like, oh, you don't belong here. And I didn't talk very much about the experience of people who belong by virtue of another identity, like has their experience in queer groups, like larger queer organizations or GSAs, like what that experience is like. So like, can I ask how many of you guys have been in an organization like that? A lot of people here, I guess. So like, does anybody have anything to say about that? What that's like being an asexual person or an aromantic person or someone on that spectrum in those spaces? You do?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of better.
It's what?
It's kind of a lot better because under old leadership, it was very like LG heavy, and it's like completely othering a lot of other people, even not just asexuals, and kind of being an asexual in that group is kind of like, oh, this is odd. They accept me, but sorta.
Oh, okay.
It's not like, oh, you're one of us. It's, oh, we welcome you. You're kind of a guest.
Almost like you're only there as an ally?
Yeah, sorta. And they didn't really like allies anyway, so there's that problem as well. Yeah, it used to be really awful. And then under new management, it got completely reworked into something called QPA.
Oh.
I forget what it stands for, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
it's a whole lot more because an asexual also got into the board, became the president, so they help like research. So it's a lot more like everybody's included. So it's improved,
Okay.
to say the least. But it was very not. At first, it really wasn't asexual friendly, but it was. If that makes sense, because it's like, yeah, you're guests. Well, you get to. It's like the special thing. And you're like, you're special cheerleader, you're special thing, but you're not one of us.
I bet that's kind of common. Did you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing I've had is kind of, again, the erasure sort of thing, where like
Okay.
people will forget that I'm in various groups in part because of my asexuality. Like they'll think it's either because genderqueer stuff, or on the other hand, they'll think that I'm bi or pan because
They'll just assume?
Yeah, because I will talk about having had partners that use both masculine and feminine pronouns, so they assume that I'm bi as opposed to ace and very confused about romanticism. So.
Oh, and you know, I've heard people say that too. That like they say, "Oh, I'm kind of jealous of people who are gay because they can come out by mentioning the gender of their partner." It's like, well, no, because if we do that, we're not necessarily coming out as that. Like, so I don't know. Yeah.
Just going off of that, like, I have been in situations where my asexuality or aromanticism is devalued compared to my other degrees of queerness. So I identify on the gray spectrum, and sometimes I say I'm biromantic asexual today. Most people only really pay attention to the biromantic or
The bi part.
the bi part, and
okay.
not going back to my gender too. I identify as agender.
Okay.
And that's complicated because agender and play into like erasure too. But
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of agender people and people who are anywhere non-binary, and even transgender people. Like they say, it's like the LGBT club. It's actually the LG. You know, like, and you know, we don't really hear the hey at all. Yeah. So you kind of felt like it's just devalued, it's kind of swept under the rug, and it's like, oh, these are the only reasons why you're here, but we don't want to see you as a whole person at all.
Or they say something like, oh, it's a shame.
Oh,
Yeah.
I hate that. Someone behind you was a person.
In doing outreach and trying to like, a lot of like queer spaces will be like, our love is equal to yours, and for people who are like aromantic, it's really just like, what is this love you're talking about? Like, and sort of again that whole like the only relationship type is
Yeah.
the sort of long-term monogamous romantic relationships.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely heard that too, and that really alienates me too. Like as an aromantic woman, I see it. You know, sometimes even in asexual circles, you'll see people going like, you know, we're just like you. We fall in love too, and I'm like, speak for yourself. So, you know, like, did you want to say something?
Yeah,
too?
let's go back to the agender, because I also
Yeah.
identify as agender,
Okay.
asexual, and romantic. And so, back last year, I lived in a floor house. I wasn't here for this because I was doing tech stuff, theater,
Oh, okay.
and so one of my friends introduced me as someone who's agender and asexual, and I use pronouns it's in itself, and there was so much backlash from like an entire group of people
Yeah, I
that
heard
it was just like, what? Like, couldn't call me that. They didn't believe asexuality, couldn't accept agender. And it was supposed to be, it was ELE, Everybody Loves Everybody Floor House, which is for like LGBTQIA friendly people. So that
sure
was,
you are.
yeah, yeah.
But I won't respect your pronouns. It makes me feel uncomfortable.
And
that's
then-
kinda weird. I don't know.
does the Mimble-Tech, I actually don't want to say, the big LGBT conference, Midwest conference, it happened recently. No. Okay. So there's huge Mimble-Tech. It's an acronym for something, and most people there, their A's all stand for allies.
I see.
And there's like two people, my school included, was asexuality, which was also like a big like, oh, so erasure. And people were like, oh no, it's not for asexuals, it's for allies.
Did you guys see that thing for GLAAD? Did anybody see the GLAAD? Yeah, okay, like where they're saying, hey, for allies, let's celebrate our allies. And the asexual community was like, the A is for asexual, give it back. And they put the A like in the back. And it actually worked. Like I think they kind of apologized, or they responded to it and they said, yes, we accept. Which I feel like they pretty much did it right. I didn't participate in that, responding to GLAAD, but I was surprised to see it. Like, did they not know that asexual people exist? Like, and actually, they said it stands for asexual, aromantic, agender, and what else? Was there 4 A's that they said it was for? I can't remember. But at least those 3. But yeah, a lot of things. We need a vowel in this thing. You know, just like LGBTQ. And I've seen I sometimes, but I've also heard that some people who are intersex don't like necessarily being grouped in there. I don't know. It's controversy. There's lots of controversies. Yeah, anybody else want to pipe up? Okay. Well, if you feel like it, I did bring the 1 copy of my book if you want to leaf through it and look at it. Because right now it's a $35 hardcover, so a lot of people haven't bought it because it's kind of expensive. And I have little business cards and also a few leftover asexual bingo sheets, which you can take if you want one. So they're kind of funny, but also depressing. But thank you so much for having me. And if anybody here spoke and didn't want to be on that video, let me know, please, because I'll edit you out. Okay? Okay. Well, thank you. I hate pizza.